The population of the United States is extremely diverse. Many building blocks of this country have been built on and developed by a key denomination of individuals, our immigrants. Some of these groups of immigrants include African Americans, European Americans, Latinx Americans, and the group that I'll be discussing today, Asian Americans. They've been able to make an impact on American culture as we know it in a variety of ways, some of which include tourism, the workforce, and one aspect that I'll be touching on today, education. Asian Americans are known for performing well in school and setting high levels of achievement. This notion has been reinforced by a long-lasting set of ideals called the model minority myth. This myth perpetuates a narrative in which all Asian Americans are seen as very high achieving, are seen as perfectly well behaved, and should serve as a model for other minorities and individuals across the nation. My name is Nilay Mistry. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a rising student at the University of Michigan, and I'm also a social justice summer research fellow. I come from a privileged place in society as a suburban student in the small town of Farmington Hills. Although my community and my school district have prided themselves on their diverse practices and diverse student body, the unwavering presence of the model minority myth in our educational communities continues to distress my peers. I personally recall being afraid to ask questions in class sometimes because of the previous interactions that I had with teachers who had told me that I was more capable than this and that they expected more from me and that these concepts were truly not that difficult. The list of similarly pressuring terminology just went on and on. At the same time, I was distressed to see that my other Asian peers were not receiving any constructive feedback at all. I knew this problem wasn't just rooted in the community of Farmington Hills, so I decided to poll my Instagram followers and ask them a few questions regarding their identity and their familiarity with the model minority myth. Around 72% of these respondents identified as Asian American. Out of the 72% of individuals, only 50% of these individuals were familiar with the model minority myth, a statistic that really shocked me. And out of this 50% of individuals, the majority of them had a significant related experience that they were willing to share. I was surprised to see that level of unfamiliarity, especially with the model minority myth, considering the diversity of the communities that my respondents represented. Luckily enough, many of these individuals were willing to share their experiences with me. And even after having brief conversations with individuals who weren't familiar with the model minority myth, they were able to recognize it and see the implications that it had within their day-to-day lives. While most people seem to agree that the stereotypes of Asian Americans are harmful, some people still question, what exactly is the harm of the model minority myth? What could be so detrimental about being a part of a group that's seen as successful in the eyes of others? There's actually a lot of problems that are associated with the model minority myth. It especially hinders our progress towards racial justice and achieving equity and equality for all. Like all stereotypes, the model minority myth erases the differences among individuals. Asian youth can be overwhelmed by parental expectations and cultural stigmas. Arriving at college, some may find it difficult to adapt to new competitive environments, and some may find it difficult to adjust to communities where emotional openness is accepted. Conversations with parents become tough to engage in with others at college, even if it's in the best interest. Eventually, stress deteriorates their ability to endure, leading to anxiety, depression, and sometimes suicidal ideation. One of my respondents described to me her experiences in dealing with mental health issues as an Asian American student. I spoke to a social worker due to my specific mental health concerns, and at the end of our meeting, she told me this. She told me that I was fine and I had nothing to worry about, even though I knew on the inside that I wasn't fine. I really found this example to be shocking because this statement came from a social worker, someone who's supposed to be a trusted adult in our educational communities. This is just one example of the deprioritization of the many mental health needs of Asian American students. professionals need to be better trained to work and accommodate individuals of all identities. Another prominent issue that the model minority myth also contributes to is the achievement gap, which is defined as any significant disparity in academic achievement between groups of students. The model minority myth not only contributes to the achievement gap between Asian Americans, African Americans, and Latin American students, but it also contributes to the achievement gap between Asian American students themselves. And as I've mentioned previously, there are teachers in educational communities who are choosing to reinforce the ideals dictated by the model minority myth and therefore are creating unfair and unhealthy classroom environments for their students every single day. Finally, the model minority myth is also harmful to the struggle for racial justice. The success of some Asian American immigrants is often held to a standard to which other individuals should strive to achieve. It suggests that if only other people were to work harder, were to form stronger family bonds, and were to overcome their histories of oppression, they too would succeed. The model minority myth is also very frequently used as evidence to deny or downplay the impact of racism on Black, Indigenous people of color residing in the United States. It's ultimately just a means to perpetuate anti-Blackness. The model minority myth pits people of color against one another and creates a hierarchy system in which Asian Americans are typically represented at the top. Asian Americans can attribute a lot of their privileges in American society in thanks to the civil rights movement led by the African Americans in the 1900s. I've been having a lot more conversations with my family as well, and although overcoming generational differences may be tough, it is well worth the effort. By pitting people of color against one another, the model minority myth is distracting us from achieving racial justice, equality, and equity for all. As a youth organizer for the Social Justice Fellows, I've been able to apply my training and knowledge to a variety of educational applications. One experience was a Diversity Day program at my high school. We organized and acquired an extremely engaging social justice theatrical performance along with accompanying dialogue sessions. It was a successful event because it reminded our students that they always had access to a safe and comfortable space to talk about issues that were pressing to them. However, there were some roadblocks that we ran into while developing and facilitating this conference. For starters, it wasn't mandatory, so we had a very minimal attendance rate. Part of this dismal attendance rate was also due to the fact of how our school promoted this event, branding it as fully optional. Some teachers even went out of their way to explain to students how unnecessary diversity education is, further driving down potential attendance rates. Around a year ago, I ran a much more successful conference for staff and administration in the Metro Detroit area. I presented on the school-to-prison pipeline, another issue that goes hand in hand with the model minority myth. The most important part of this workshop was establishing methods to diminish the presence of the school-to-prison pipeline in our inner-city communities. The most striking method and solution that my participants and I had discussed was bias training. Bias training is especially beneficial for students and staff because it has the ability to encompass a variety of important concepts. Bias training requires passionate youth and adults who are comfortable with leading discussion on potentially sensitive topics. It also requires very meaningful content, something that will resonate with youth and adults alike. Written content combined with supplementary dialogue is a proven and true method, something that I've personally used myself. This type of training may seem like a lot of work. However, the positive effects are well worth the effort. We need to work to normalize bias training and diversity modules in our educational environments, because these cannot be considered sensitive topics anymore. After all, they have everything to do with basic human rights and virtuous principles. I challenge you to advocate for mandatory bias training for staff and administration on the model minority myth. I also challenge you to advocate for introducing mandatory modules on diversity education for students in our educational communities, because these are issues that Asian American youth deal with on a day-to-day basis. We need support from individuals in higher positions, such as school administration and government officials, to help advocate for and bring these ideas to fruition. Because together, we can create a more supportive and inclusive environment for students of all identities.